across the country. One of the tools that they're using to mitigate those challenges is community land trust and shared equity models. So for example, out in Portland, Oregon, there's a community land trust called Proud Ground. Their goal is to have 75% of the homeowners be black or brown. So I don't see why we can't do the same thing here. But again, we'll get into the design and the input that we'll get for our community land trust, hopefully. But that's another example. And then one of the most striking stats that I came across is that they're well tested and proven to work. So a study from 2018 looked at 4,000 units in 20 states over 30 years and found that 99% of those units avoided foreclosure. 99%. As a teacher, in general, you almost never come across the number 99%. So for this study to find 99% of those houses, those units, avoided foreclosure, that's astounding. That's through all the dips and turns that we've had over the past 30 years. People stayed in their homes. So the community land trust model is something that once I came across it, I was like, oh, we got to make this happen. And so I'm with my fellow board member, Vaughn, who's going to get more into what a community land trust is and how it works. So I'm going to turn it over to Vaughn.
Thanks, Coy. Good evening, everybody. Like Coy said, I'm getting readjusted to actually speaking out in public again. I had to speak last week for a bunch of youth, and it was about 10 minutes before I was speaking to them. I was like, man, I forgot how to do this. What do I do again? And what kind of papers am I supposed to hand out? So it's certainly a pleasure and a privilege to be able to see you all. We'll just get in right into it. But before I talk about the education, I really want to talk about why this is important to me. I'm a longtime Ward 8 resident. I've been living in my home for over 20 years. Third generation Washingtonian. And my daughter, who just turned 31, she's middle income. She did things what we would say is the right way. She finished high school, she went off to college, she came back, she got a good job. She went through the HPAP program, and she couldn't afford to buy anything in DC. And this housing crisis that we have here is not just like a low income situation. It's cutting off people that for generations have been able to become homeowners. And so, I don't know for a lot of, what is this, the millennial generation? I guess it's the millennials that are buying homes. I forget the generations. But what's happening is it's the prices of homes have become so expensive. It has really become a barrier for a lot of young people to get into homes. And so, as Coy was saying, CLTs is a model to make sure that not just anybody that can come in, but more specifically a lot of the indigenous residents who have been here can take advantage of some of the home ownership opportunities in the area. And so really quickly, I just want to go through what a community land trust is. It's probably going to provoke more questions for you than give you answers. And so looking forward to really answering some of your questions afterwards. What is a CLT? A community land trust pretty much is a nonprofit organization that's made up of community members, and ultimately they collectively own land and lease access to that land at below market prices. They are made up of primarily what's called a tripartite board, which means a third of their board comes directly from people that live within the community land trust units. A third come from within the unit, from within the community, and then a third come from subject matter experts. So basically 2/3 of their board actually are the ones that are in the majority control. So when decisions are being made, so for example, with the Douglass Community Land Trust, when it came to our bylaws, when it comes to decisions like who can fit the criteria to purchase a home, it's 2/3 of the community that is making those decisions, and that will continue to make those decisions. Next slide. How do they work? This can get really complicated. The way I would describe it is CLTs pretty much separate the cost of the housing or rental space from the land that it sits on. So for example, what the CLT manages is like the land that the physical structure is put on. So an example of a CLT model could be if it's in a housing unit, for example. Let's just say a house is worth $400,000, but the person that comes in can only afford to purchase that home at $200,000. The CLT could then put a subsidy of $200,000 into that home and tell that homeowner, listen, I'm going to give you this subsidy. However, we like to employ what's called a pay it forward model. So if you ever sell this home, you don't have to sell, but if you ever sell this home, 75 or a certain percentage of the value that's been appreciated in that home is going to stay in the home. The other percentage is going to stay with the homeowner. So let's just say it was a 75-25 split, 75 stayed in the home. You can go to the next slide, by the way. And 75 stayed in the home. So 10 years later, this person decides to sell, and the house is now worth $500,000. So that means there's an appreciation of value of $100,000. $75,000 of that money will stay in the home, $25,000 will stay with the homeowner. And so what happens is now you still have that original subsidy of $200,000 plus an additional $75,000. So the next person that's coming to purchase that home can afford it at $225,000, not $500,000. And so what it does is allow for residents who have been here to continue to stay here. It is not a model for somebody that can afford to get into the traditional housing market on their own, because they're going to lose value ultimately if they go back to sell it. But it's definitely for somebody to be able to get their foot into a traditional market. But this allows for people to get into home ownership. It allows for individuals that otherwise could not afford to purchase a home to get into home ownership. Some of the different examples of CLT, of units that can be in a community land trust are single family homes, like the example I just gave, or limited equity housing co-ops, or condominiums, or rental units. With those rental units, it's less about those individuals staying in the home and allowing for some shared equity, but it's more about how can we make sure to keep the rental prices at an affordable rate so that long-term people can stay within their community. And then there are also examples of things like commercial spaces or schools. And so the community land trust can fit a number of different models. There is no one size fits all. With every community, we really can adjust the model to fit within the community's needs. Next. Here's another type of example. Here's another type of example of, I think it's mainly because I'm backing away. I told y'all I'm out of practice. This is another example of what I was sharing originally, and pretty much what this just says is like, for a traditional market rate home, the cost of the house could be $632,000. You're going to need a subsidy of $454,000, whereas in a CLT model, the cost could be $178,000 with no additional subsidy required. And so this kind of just maps out after 7 years, after 14 years, after 28 years, to see kind of what the difference it could be, with a market rate home versus a community land trust model. Next. Finally, and then I think I'm going to hand it back over to Coy. I really just want to emphasize that as our market goes up, especially in DC, and I mean really across the country, the gap between, I mean, Coy mentioned earlier, like some of the discrepancies. I'm just going like the gap between haves and have-nots, the gap between the income gap between blacks and between whites, like it just continues to expand, right? And when we start to talk about justice, when we start to talk about equity, we can't just talk about equity if we're not talking about how we're starting to remove barriers. And for home ownership, particularly in wealth creation, a lot of that will come through home ownership. And for years, we had things like redlining that did not allow for, we had things like redlining that put covenants against people of color actually purchasing homes, right? What something like a community land trust can do is put a covenant on something, but in order to invest back in people and to make them whole again. And so ultimately, like, you know, if you hear anything that I'm saying, it's really creating this legal mechanism to make sure, to try to make people whole again. And so that's what we're trying to do through the community land trust model. Cool.
Yes, thank you, Vaughn. Yeah. And so this is the exciting part. So we have an opportunity to bring the Douglass, to expand the Douglass Community Land Trust into Southwest. So the fire truck repair station is going to be redeveloped at some point. Charles Allen, he shared that the budget for the fire and EMS is lined up to build a new repair shop at Blue Plains in about 3 to 4 years. So at some point, that site is going to get redeveloped. The comprehensive plan gave us a clue that they're readying that. So you can see that the zoning changed. It's now, it's permitted to do residential and commercial space there. So the question is, why should we not do this? So we've seen the wharf, we've seen 4th and M, we've seen the Randall School. Those parcels of land were sold for pretty much nothing. The wharf, $1, and we got a whole bunch of expensive restaurants and apartments and condos out of that. And you know, this is my personal gripe, but Jenny's was my favorite Chinese restaurant. They have the best General Tso's chicken I've ever had. They've been in the neighborhood for 40 years. There was 100,000 plus square feet of retail at the wharf, but they couldn't find space for a 40-year restaurant. So for me, that's personally why I can't do it. So we have an opportunity to not only provide affordable housing, commercial space, but we get to determine what goes there. Okay, so that's the exciting part for me. There's reason to believe that I'm hopeful. Brian Stevenson says, if you're not hopeful, you're part of the problem. And I 100% believe that. So in the most recent budget, they had $37 million for infrastructure at McMillan. They had, let me make sure I get my numbers right. They got $11 million for Hill East. They got $20 million to redo the Crumble School. So there's no reason for me to believe that we can't get tens of millions of dollars to do this in Southwest. Now, the part that we're going to need to do is that we're going to need to build community support. Community support to me is going to lead to being able to push council members. Being able to push the council members, I think will make it more likely for us to get some money in this budget, potentially. So yes, we're already on to the next slide. So this, I just want to give an update on what we've already been doing. So we launched this in April. We've already got 200 people that have signed the petition. We have the physical petition in the back with Laisha and Brandon. So if you're picking up what I'm putting down, you can sign the petition there. We also have it online at bit.ly/SWCLT. For those on Zoom, my wife is on Zoom, so if she can drop that in the chat, that would be awesome teamwork. Yes, so we've been doing some outreach. We're in the early stages of this. So we've reached out to James Creek. Christine Spencer said that she was interested. I reached out to Tell Court. Phyllis Johnson said she's interested, and we've reached out to Greenleaf, the senior and the extension. Hopefully, this is just the first meeting. We're going to be doing lots of outreach to get more input and educate people on what this is and see if it's something that they're interested in, and if they are, then let's make this happen. I did not see this coming. I've kind of been, I won't say heckling, I'm gonna give myself the benefit of the doubt. I've been on Charles Allen about CLTs and making it happen in Southwest, and then on June 3rd, he shared with me that he sent a letter to the Deputy Mayor of Planning and Economic Development, John Falcicio, asking him if he would consider a CLT model at the site. I was like, Charles, no, this is excellent. So thank you, Charles, for that. On June 7th, Ginger and I, we met with ANC 16. We pretty much gave the same presentation that we're giving to y'all. They expressed interest, and so we're waiting for another meeting to do that. Another thing that's, we're working. We're trying to work. We're trying to make this happen in a lot of different ways. Derek Hyra, who is the director of the Metropolitan Policy Center at American University, also wrote the book Race, Class, and Politics in the Cappuccino City, reached out to us at Southwest Action about a grant opportunity. This grant opportunity would be for 2 to 3 years. It would be $350,000, and we can hire 2 residents we've already reached out to, we think would be great for this, to do research on what we should have in the CLT. How best can this CLT serve the community? So that's a grant that we're going to apply for. There's other parts of it as well, but we're going to apply for that at the end of this month, and hopefully, if that works out, then that gives us another boost. But even if we don't get it, the work is going to continue. So we can go to the next slide. Yes, so the next slide are the next steps. So like I said, we're going to continue to do outreach, especially residents that are living in public housing. We want to have their interests, their needs front and center. So we're going to continue to do outreach. Even if you don't live in public housing, we still value your input. If you want to get involved, if you want to help, host discussions or meetings or whatever in your building or whatever, we're down. We just want to get this out to the community, get feedback, and keep it moving. And we want to obtain support from additional council members. We know that long-term we're going to need the at-large council members. We're going to need other board council members because they're going to have to vote on a potential budget that approves, the millions of dollars for it. So we're going to continue to push politically and in the community. If you want to get involved, you can find us on social media. We've got our emails, swdcaction@gmail.com. You can find me after the meeting as well, and we can talk about next steps. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Vaughn to give a little bit more info about the Douglass CLT.
So ultimately, the mission of the Douglass Community Land Trust is really about how can we be this organization that's centered around racial and economic equity. And so it's not, it is about housing for us, but it's about how are we using housing as a vehicle to promote and to enact racial and economic equity within our communities. Go ahead. Next slide. Here's just a list of, I mentioned the tripartite board previously. Here's a list of all of our board members. And I would like to, so I'll pat myself on the back a little bit. Before we were an actual board, and the Land Trust was actually its own 501c3, we were an advisory committee, and we were very intentional about making sure that we had as many diverse voices in the community. Oftentimes people want to paint a community with a broad stroke, but there's often many different voices within the communities. And of these 16 folks that are on the board, I want to say at least close to 70% of them were members that were on our initial advisory committee. So we've really been able to retain, to train, A lot of these individuals had no idea what a community land trust was when we first started, and any of them could be up here speaking with you today, because they've become that much knowledgeable. Next. One of the things that is really important to us is this idea of stewardship, right? It's not just us. So when we are working with residents, it's really about lifetime partnership, right? It's not about us providing some subsidies and then leaving them alone, but how do we make sure that we can empower residents? How do we make sure that residents can not just survive, but they can thrive within their communities? And what types of services, can we support them in? So whether that's through things like foreclosure prevention or job and career placement, just really looking at different services that a lot of these residents will need in order to just thrive in life. And so we would certainly have some, one of the staff persons from Douglass Community Land Trust, Adam Balloon, wave your hand, Adam, who's a lot of his role is really around stewardship and making sure that we're providing the residents with the support services that they need. Here's just some of the accomplishments. I won't read through them all, but we became our own existing 501c3, I guess it's a little over a year ago now. 2 years? Oh my goodness. Listen, COVID has messed me up, and time doesn't exist anymore. Last year's is gone, so going on 2 years now. We have had an annual meeting and we elected new board members, Coy being one of those. We have, I think one awesome example was pivoting COVID-19 relief efforts to support rental assistance. So we, through my work with the Bridge Park, because the Douglass Community Land Trust, it spawned out of our equitable development plan. We were fortunate to be a part of this partnership called Thrive, which provided 500 residents in Ward 8 financial assistance. They could use those resources however they wanted, but a lot of them used it for rental assistance. And so one of our units, the Savannah Apartments, that has about 66 units, we actually provided those resources to anybody that wanted to participate in the program. And so, again, it's not just about this initial engagement, but we're looking at building these lifetime partnerships with a lot of these members. Another huge thing from the city, we just, I think the bid budget was just approved, but how much money was it? $2 million? $2 million was funded to the land trust that from the city, and so that was just huge with us. We have been in front of the community, in front of the city council, in front of the mayor's office, really just pushing for the community land trust. And so this was just, it underscored for us that people are really starting to believe in the model, and that we can start to really make some impact in our community. Some of our pipelines, the things that are included in our pipeline are development at Lebanon Villages at Langston Slater, 6 new construction ownership and partnership with DC Habitat, 4 artist houses which are located in Southeast DC. Again, I won't go through all of these, but those are just some examples of the accomplishments that we have achieved. Finally, again, this is just more examples of some of the work that we've done. And so whether it's the Lebanon Villages, the Savannah Apartments, which I just mentioned, and then the last slide was a night out that we had with a number of residents. And this was our Douglass CLT night at the Nationals. Again, a lot of people talk about a CLT and community land trust. at Douglass Community Land Trust, we emphasize the C in Community Land Trust, which is community. We believe when you start to talk about equity, and I'll say this wherever I go, you can't have a real conversation about equity if you're not talking about a redistribution of power. And we believe it is important for us to put the decision-making power back in the hands of the community. And we do it through community engagement, through collective stewardship, but also through empowering the community to make the decisions for their own lives and for their own communities. All right, well, thank you all for listening. Certainly looking forward to answering any questions.